Welcome to 5-Minute Sports Science, where I'm going to take you through 3 beginning questions to help jumpstart and maximize your sport science. I'm going to take you through questions 1, 2, and 3, with 3 often being the most forgotten one, as well as what's the point of all of this and how to turn this into action steps. Please subscribe if you want to stay up to date with this video series. Like the video if you like the video, and let's do it. Question number 1. What is the minimum amount of data needed to make decisions? Now, it's super easy to get caught up in wanting to collect anything and everything under the sun because data is awesome. I know. But let's talk about giving them too much data. So you are the data person. You love it. You can collect anything and everything you want. But everyone involved in the process isn't. They're experts as the sport coach, the strength and conditioning coach, the sports scientist, or even the athlete themselves. And the more data you give them, the more they have to wrap their head around it, kind of put all the pieces together, understand different variables differently, which is your job. So your job as a sports scientist is to make it concise, is to communicate only what they need to know. Like I said, giving them too much is just going to be too confusing because that's not their job. So if you only need 2 numbers to help them make decisions, well, 3, 4, and 5 is just going to add confusion to the process. That's putting responsibility on them. That's not their responsibility. Your job is to figure out, of the 5, what are the 2 they need, and then communicate it like that. So, maximum data, more opportunity for confusion. Minimum data, just what they need to help drive the goal of sports science, which is decisions. Minimum data needed to help drive decisions. Question number 2, what is the frequency of the decisions being made based on the data? And this will consequently affect your data communication. Now, even if you make decisions on a weekly basis, you can still collect on a daily basis. It just won't be communicated in that style. So knowing kind of this end goal or the end process of this data, you can then kind of work backwards and figure out your protocols, not only for data collection, but more importantly, the data communication. Because if you're not going to make decisions except for once a week at the end of the week, well, you don't need to look at the data every single day leading up to it. Whenever you make decisions, that's when you look at all of the data, depending on what type of data you collect. So starting kind of with the end goal, like I said, you can thus work backwards to figure out your data communication to make it the most concise possible going on question 1. Question number 3, often the most forgotten but very important question, is what are you willing to ask of your athletes relative to the data collection? And this is extremely important because this will also, working backwards, influence the type of data you collect and the frequency of the data collected. With all sports science, it's something on top of their sport, whether it's asking them to come in early to do certain testing and protocols, stay after, or even just wear a ton of technology during and things like that. So by working backwards, knowing what you're willing or not willing to ask of the athletes, communicating the expectations of what's required to them relative to their contribution to this whole sports science process will influence what technology you buy. It'll affect what data you end up having available to you, what variables you're willing to collect of them, consequent to their contribution to this whole process. So just having them in mind that it is important that you're asking for more of them. So what are you willing to ask of your athletes? What's the point of all this? Putting all the pieces together, if you know what you're willing to ask of your athletes and their contribution to the whole process because you're getting the data on them, if you know what has to be communicated, what's the minimum amount needed to be communicated to the other important people of the process, such as the performance staff, and if you know how frequently that data needs to be communicated, well, the variables and the protocols will almost take care of themselves, having those 3 factors in mind: the communication, the athletes themselves, and everyone else in that process. So putting it all together, you start with this framework, thinking about your sports science and what's required, and also what's the minimum required, what are you willing to be required, will take care of the protocols, the variables, the actual data collection itself. So turning this into action, write out these 3 questions. What's the minimum amount of data I need to collect? What's the frequency of the decisions that are being made based on the data? And what am I willing to ask of my athletes as extra or on top for this sports science? then write out those answers and figure it out. So hopefully those three questions will be an awesome starting spot, a beginning point for your sport science.